And like Tom and I were discussing, this chapter is a little different in the way it's put together. They don't have a video on it, but they do have a PowerPoint, and I've managed to pull that up, and Tom tells me that you guys do have access to it. So we're just going to try to go forward with that rather than the way we've been doing some of these other things. But we're going to spend the next couple of classes talking about pesticide formulations. And
is the label still the law?
It will always be the law. Okay, and we'll talk about that again, I'm sure, Tyler. That's not a problem. But the formulation that we're talking about, and we want to try to create an understanding of that, and it follows the chapter that we had about the label, because we have so many different types of formulations. And a formulation is nothing more than the way that a pesticide is put together or the way it's built. And it's going to have a combination of active and inert or inactive ingredients. And a lot of them are formulated in a manner in which you, so that you will dilute them to improve the effectiveness or make them a lot safer or easier to handle. And as an example of what I mean by dilute, for example, Saturday I was putting some more material on what grapes I've got left, and I was using a particular type of insecticide because at this point in the year we're concerned about trying to maintain the integrity of the grapes that we've got left. So, bees and flies and all sorts of critters want to sting those grapes to try to gain access to the sugar content that's in those grapes. And there is another little fruit fly that is terribly detrimental to the grapes, and what they'll do is actually puncture that little grape and get it to begin to seep that juice out. They're the same little critters that you'll see around a piece of ripening fruit, or if you have cider or anything that's left open, they look like fruit gnats, little gnats, and the material that I was trying to use to deter those types of critters was it was a material called Mustang Max, and the rate that I was using was I was putting 8 ounces in 400 gallons of water. So in essence, 2 liquid ounces per 100 gallons of water to dilute. The material is concentrated enough that you needed to dilute it in that manner to make it effective and make it cost effective. So a gallon of the stuff cost me about $160, but when you're only using 2 ounces on 100 gallons of water, it does pay for itself. But that's just an example of the way that was put together. The active ingredient is the chemical in a pesticide product that affects or controls the agent. We talked about that when we were talking about the others. And the inert ingredient is the inactive component of the pesticide formulation. If we take this away from the chemical, or from the spray industry or ag chemical industry, and relate it to fertilizers. Most all of you are familiar with a bag of fertilizer. And a common fertilizer formulation would be a 5-10-10. And normally that's dispensed in a 50-pound bag. So you're looking at 5% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus and 10% potash. So, you know, and that's based on 100 pounds. So in a 100 pounds of fertilizer, you'd have 5 pounds of nitrogen, 10 pounds of phosphorus, and 10 pounds of potash. So we're looking at only 25 pounds of actual nutrient in 100 pounds. So that other 75 pounds that would be in that 100 pounds of fertilizer would be what we call inert ingredients or carrier. It's filler. So, you know, in most pesticide formulations, we've got, you know, 50% wettable powder material is going to have 50% of the active ingredient and then 50% of something else. An example I usually use is one called Captan. It's a fungicide. It comes as a 50% wettable powder. 50% of that is the true Captan, and the other 50% is carrier. A lot of times it's talc. It's just powder. There's all sorts of carriers that are used, but something that will dilute in water and be able to facilitate the application of the material. So that's what we're talking about with different materials there. This next slide it's a sample ingredient statement, and it talks about a material there called diathon. I'm not sure what that one is, but it gives the chemical name as 1,2-phosphor-5,4-chloromethane. There's 20% of that in a given volume, and 80% of it is inert ingredient or carrier. The inert ingredient is generally has no pesticidal activity, and it is harmless. So, but these are, as Tyler says, are on the label. They're part of the law. So, as we talk about different pesticide formulations, we have an opportunity to, in most cases, to choose the type of formulation that we want to use. And most of that's based on the safety to the applicator, the safety to the environment, the pest biology, in other words, the stage which that we're going to attempt to attack the pest, the type of equipment that we've got, the target site, and the cost. But these are all things that we need to think about when we're talking about a pesticide formulation. And this next slide gives you a list of formulation abbreviations. And these are things you need to be aware of. These will show up on our tests that we do, because you need to know what they mean. You know, they're as simple as A standing for aerosol, and an AF is an aqueous flowable, which means that it's a liquid material that is based in water because of the aqueous term. The B is a bait. C is listed as a concentrate. D is a dry flowable. Or D is a dust. DF is a dry flowable. I get ahead of myself. We'll see E or EC used as emulsifiable concentrate. And we're going to talk about several of these as we go forward. So, flowable is another type of solution. G is a granule. L with a liquid, LC a liquid concentrate. And M is a micro-encapsulated, and that one's a little complicated. We'll talk about it specifically. Then we talk about Ps or PS as a pellet. An RTU is a ready-to-use. S is solution. SP is a soluble powder. ULV is ultra-low volume. That's not really a pesticide formulation. That's more of a method of application. You've got wettable powder, water dispersible granular. WP again is wettable powder. WS is water soluble. WSB is a water soluble bag. And to me, they've got a little bit of this mixed up because I was thinking primarily of formulations, but they've got a lot of these other ones put in here. A water soluble bag, there has been a generation of pesticides formulated in the last 20 years that they were trying to reduce the contact of the pesticide handler or the person that's putting the material into the tank or spray tank and so forth. So they come up with a water soluble bag that's held in basically a master container. Generally, they're usually a half a pound or a pound of the 7, for example, and it might be in a little pouch that looks a whole lot like saran wrap, but that saran wrap in there is water soluble, and if you happen to touch it with your hands and your fingers are a little damp, that thing's going to dissolve, and you actually dissolve before your fingers touch it. But with a water soluble bag, you just take that half a pound thing and pitch it over in the tank, and the water from your nurse tank is going to dissolve that bag and make it available for the pesticide to be diluted. Water soluble concentrate, water soluble liquid, water soluble powder, or again a water soluble packet. A water soluble bag and a water soluble packet would be identical things, the very same thing. These are a list of abbreviations that you will want to know because they are, as Tyler says, they are components of pesticide labels and are used in the descriptions and discussions that were used to begin to apply these things. It talks about other products commonly formulated. It says many chemicals are formulated to provide better product for people. Examples are medicine, shampoos, paints, makeup, soaps, processed foods are all formulated in some manner to make it easier for us to use and consume. An example of this type of formulation, how many of you use an automatic dishwasher or a washing machine?
Yes.
Tyler does. Okay. What type of soap or cleaning agent do you use in either of those machines? Is it a liquid material, or is it a granular material, or is it a little packet or pouch?
Liquid.
Granular.
Tyler uses granular. Any of you use the little pouches, the little pack, little soluble things?
Oh, we do in my household now.
Okay. Well,
No, because we're trying to encourage our children to like do their own laundry, and that way we don't have a nightmare of them measuring and that kind of stuff. They just drop it in there. Yes. And ultimately, yeah, you talk about it being bad for the environment, but we find you get a lot less waste if you're sitting there trying to pour whatever. Invariably, when you're pouring it in a cup or whatever, you're probably going to end up using more than you should in the dishwasher or in a washing machine. So in this case, it's sort of, yeah. And so you get what you need, but you only get what you need. So.
what you mentioned something about bad for the environment. What is the negative aspect of that towards the environment?
Yeah.
I don't say bad for them.
I thought you did say it was bad.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the plastic wrapper that the thing's on is, I thought you said that. But I mean, there really shouldn't be, because it's going to dissolve into water into, I don't know what it's made out of.
Well, how's it? Why don't they get
Yeah,
trapped
but
up
when they're in the
and have a little
packets,
packet
they're,
thing?
No, no.
it's just,
It completely dissolves like, dare I say, like cotton candy. You put it in your mouth, it's going to completely dissolve. It's gone. It's not like you can have a residual melted ball of plastic or
I said
something.
a bad thing for it.
It's not.
Exactly.
Well, you're the one that said, I thought you said it. I misunderstood what you said. So,
I would tell you what I said, but I can't remember that far back.
yeah, that's what I'm saying, but I don't know. But John asked, why is it bad for the environment? And so we're talking about it.
Why are you looking at me?
But I thought you said it. So anyway. I wasn't-
Well, the point I'm trying to make is these are pouches or packets that have been formulated with a given amount of material in them, and the chemical industry has gone to using that as a safety valve to the handler, that rather than Amanda having to go and open a 50-pound bag and dip in with a scoop and weigh out a pound of a dusty, powdery material, they've got it in a little pouch that is self-contained, and you just toss that in the tank and the water dissolves it. So, the only liability, the only real problem that I have with them is some of these little pouches may not dissolve quite as quickly as you think, and if you're not really observant when you're putting your materials in a tank, if you've got one of those little pouches laying there, and then you may put in some sort of liquid material that is not water, it may be an oil-based thing, there's sometimes a little bit of an interaction between that little vessel that's holding your Captan or your 7, whatever it might be. It has a little interaction with that, with the liquid or oil-based material you have. And you look down in the tank in a few minutes and you got a big glob of, pardon my expression, but this is the only way I can really describe it. Looks like a wad of snot in there, because it's just a gluey mass because of the way that you did it. It'll all eventually dissolve, but it's not the best mechanism. So when you put those little pouches in, if you're the mixer handler, you want to make sure that goes into solution before you add other materials. We've just had that happen before, and if it doesn't fully dissolve, then you've got some real issues with your nozzles, because that stuff will work all the way through the system and tends to stop up nozzles. But
What is 7 again?
What?
What is 7 again?
7 is an insecticide.
tell them what 7
Carbamate.
stands for.
What?
7
What's 7?
bugs, or 7 different pest control, like 7 different types of pests.
No, that was just the trade name that came out with that material 50 years ago. And I don't think it has any connotation in that direction at all, because it's a very broad-based insecticide, and I'm sure it'll control 50 things more than it will 7. So it was just, for some reason, they called it 7.
I thought they called it 7 because on the bag, when you get it from Walmart or a Tractor Supply, it is called 7 because it does kill or eliminate 7 different types of pests on the label.
I've never seen that one, but like I say, I've used that one for longer than you've been alive, and it's
Right.
it's been a broad-based material. It has a lot of different attributes. If you're, as an example, Carol, it'll kill jack beetles, bean bugs, wasp, and all sorts of insects.
Yes, sir.
And from an apple grower's perspective, if you are knowledgeable about the timing of it, you can actually thin apples by using 7. It has a secondary effect of reducing the number of apples that are on a given tree. It'll also, if you apply it to your green beans at the wrong time, or right time, whichever you might think, right after they bloom, it'll eliminate additional beans on your bean plant. I've had people come to me and say, well, I've had beautiful blooms and I put 7 on them for the bean beetles, but I don't have any beans now. What it'll actually do is it'll thin your beans because of the interaction with the, and it's a secondary effect, interaction that occurs with the blossom. And that's what it does with the apple. With Red Delicious, for example, we're talking about a given blossom of Red Delicious. When they bloom, they've got 5 flowers. In other words, potential to have 5 little apples on a single shoot, which would never be a marketable size. They'll all just be little bitty dudes. You can spray 7 on Red Delicious within 7 to 14 days after they bloom and eliminate 4 out of those 5 apples. It's a secondary effect. So, you know, it's just something else we find. But anyway, I don't think that the way you interpret in that label is exactly what they intended. All right, moving along. It talks about formulation examples. And it's a lot of different things, different formulations of pesticides and household examples or have similar formulations as pesticide stuff. We talk about liquid formulations. A lot of liquid formulations are mixtures. In other words, a combination of 2 or more substances. The substances do not chemically or physically react with one another. One of them is the diluent. The diluent is a liquid used to make a pesticide less concentrated. In other words, the diluent, you diluted it with something. Another term that we talk about is a solvent. It's a liquid that will dissolve a substance to form a true solution. Can anybody give me an example of a true solution?
Isn't true solution 50-50?
What?
Isn't true solution a mixture that's equal parts?
No, not actually. It can be more of one than the other. But what are we talking about with a true solution? All right. A solution is a mixture that results in dissolving a substance in a liquid, which is a solvent. An example would be salt water. You can take a tablespoon of salt and put it in a pint of water, and it will dissolve, totally dissolve. Then you've got salt water, but it's, you know, you don't have equal parts of either, okay? Another one would be a household ammonia. An example of a suspension, that's a mixture of undissolved particles or droplets that are in a liquid.
Oil and water.
Oil and water is one. Flour and water. You ever tried to dissolve flour with water? Okay. You ever made gravy? You can do that with, you mix flour and water. There's a thickening agent for gravy if you're doing it. But the flour does not dissolve in the water. It's just suspended in there. Same thing with milk. It's also called an emulsion. Emulsifiable concentrates are listed as ECs or E's as these abbreviations. And that's a liquid, oil-soluble active ingredient dissolved in one or more solvents. And when added to water, it forms an emulsion. An example of a household example that you would be familiar with would be something like pine salt or pine oil cleaner. Okay? Some of the advantages of ECs are they're easier to handle, they're versatile, require little agitation, they're non-abrasive, and adapt to many types of application equipment, and usually do not leave a visual residue on treated surfaces. Some of the disadvantages, they're easy to overdose, can harm treated surfaces and or plants. The term when we're talking about harmful activity on plants is phytotoxic. Phyto means that it's the application of it is toxic to the plant. ECs are easily absorbed through the skin, usually have a strong odor. Some may be corrosive or flammable or difficult to clean up spills.
When it says corrosive, does it mean just caustic or does it mean even throw like hydrochloric acid?
Well, either one of those is corrosive. Rust is a corrosion. You know, there are degrees of corrosiveness, you know, that we're talking about. So there are different degrees there. As we talk about these different formulations, we're going to spend a little time talking about the adaptability or the usefulness of these different formulations as we begin to construct a spray application. And when we're talking about this, the ECs, they say they're versatile, require little agitation. In other words, when you pour them in a tank, they'll stay in solution, stay in that mix. And they're non-abrasive. Some of these materials that we'll talk about will be of an abrasive nature. In other words, they'll be kind of grainy, and that abrasiveness is tough on the equipment that you're using. If you're using some sort of mechanized equipment that has a pump, you don't want to use many abrasive materials because they tend to wear on your pump, on the impellers and things of that type. And that's what we're talking about with the types of application equipment. ECs or emulsifiable concentrates do not leave a visible residue on treated surfaces. Back in the history of growing apples, you know, we would spray a lot of materials on apples from the time they started to green up in the spring until about 10 to 14 days before harvest. We would spray something nearly every 2 weeks. And that's fine. We're protecting the apples, but when we go to the harvesting process, the buying public are not favorably affected by having a lot of spray residue on an apple. You know, you'll see people, the next question they ask you is this safe to eat? Should I wash it? If you've got visible spray residue on it, a lot of times it may not be anything of any detriment at all, but it's not well received. You know, apples, eggplant. If you spray eggplant with something that shows up on the side of that eggplant's a big old purple looking thing that, you know, if you've got a fleck of anything on it, it's going to show. And it's not going to be well received by people that are going to be buying your product. So that's a consideration. So ECs work well in that area. Talk about concentrate solutions. So the abbreviations that we use there are the C, the LC, the WCS, the WSL. They are liquids that form true solutions by dissolving in water or oil. A household example would be apple juice concentrate. You know, that comes in a can, frozen can, and you will just put water to it, and it forms a true solution. They've got examples of different pesticides on here, but they aren't of anything that you guys would have any knowledge of at all, so I'm not even going to speak to those things. But trying to create an awareness with what we're talking about, the concentrate solutions. Advantages of those: they're easy to handle, require no agitation because they go in solution. You don't have. What we mean by agitation is that we have to have some sort of mechanism to keep the spray tank stirred, for lack of a better way of talking about it. The spray machines that we used to use at home had a big shaft through the middle of the tank that had a series of paddles on it, and that would, when the engine was running, it would turn those paddles and keep it agitated or stirred up. Some of the spray machines will have a bypass system on it. When the pump is on, it will provide pressure to the boom or the nozzle, whatever you're using to apply the material, but it'll usually have a valve in it that will reduce the pressure and throw the bypass into the bottom of the tank, which will create an active agitation through the additional circulation there. The concentrate solutions are easy to handle, no agitation, non-abrasive. It says it will not plug screens or parts of your nozzle. And they generally don't leave any residue either. Some of the disadvantages are they limited availability. They are really tough to clean up and can be easily absorbed through the skin. And when they're talking about easily absorbed through the skin, that's primarily danger to the handler, the person that's mixing and handling your materials. The RTU, or ready to use materials, and I know all of you have seen these and most of you probably used them, but they're liquid solutions diluted to the proper rate and ready to apply.
Roundup be considered one of them?
Roundup is one, and that's listed here. Well, you can't see it, but if I monkey with it, you won't be able to see it. But you know, you can buy ready to use Roundup at Lowe's or Home Depot or most any of the big box stores. It's not the best way to buy it, but it is convenient, and it can either be water or petroleum based. Windex is another example, if we're using a household example, of a ready to use material. You've got a solvent in water that you can spray on to wash your windows. Advantages are convenient, less exposure risk, often contained in an application device. Disadvantages, limited uses, extremely high costs per unit of active ingredient. Tyler mentioned the Roundup. A quart ready-to-use dispenser of Roundup probably going to cost you, I don't know, $5 or $6 for a quart of material. If you bought Roundup in a 2.5 gallon jug, the full concentrate material, which would, well, the 2.5 gallon jug is going to be 128, 256, roughly, just for calculation purposes, 300 ounces. That 300 ounces would probably cost you less than $40. And if you bought this pint ready to use, it would probably cost you $5. And that 300 ounces would essentially make 300 gallons of the same concentration that you got in that quart ready to use. So you paid a lot for that bottle. Is what I'm getting. And you know, Monsanto's making a killing on selling that way. So, but not just everybody. There's a lot of remarketers of Roundup into those containers. All right, when we're talking about the different abbreviations a while ago, we talked about ultra low volume, and that's a system by which we use very small particles or droplets, and they're suspended in the air, and you're using almost 100% active ingredient. Mosquito control is one of the things that we're using for in type of pesticide application, and in a household application you're using what they call a room mister. Back when I was working in Winchester, in the apple industry, there was a standard spray machine, and the standard method of application was a totally dilute system. In other words, you would put, for example, 2 pounds of Captan per 100 gallons of water, and you would apply 400 gallons of that mixture on an acre of mature apple trees. And during the time I spent in Winchester, they went to to using what they called a low volume or an ultra low volume type of application. They changed the type of spray machine they were using to what they called a mist blower. And it was a little device that might have a 100-gallon tank on it. And you would, in that 100 gallons, you would put essentially 50 pounds of say, Captain, and we were originally using 2 pounds and 100 gallons of water. And that machine had a real high velocity fan and really small nozzles. And you were actually just applying almost the active ingredient to the apple trees, where before you would put on the 400 gallons on an acre and you'd actually spray those trees until the water dripped on. So it was a total change in the way that it was done. A lot of the mosquito control now is done through ultra low volume. In other words, you've got a backpack machine that you put small amounts of water on in, and they'll walk the areas in Florida and areas down the eastern part of the state where they've got a lot of mosquitoes, and they'll actually spray in the areas of these lagoons and swampy areas to reduce mosquitoes. But they're spraying primarily the active ingredient in just a mist of water or some sort of carrier. Totally different type of application. And the reason that the apple growers were doing it up there, it greatly reduced or increased their efficiency. Using the old system with 400 gallons to the acre, a given machine and operator could probably only spray 15 or 20 acres of apples in a day because he had to spend so much time refilling and hauling so much water. Where an ultra low volume machine, he might spray 75 or 100 acres in a day because he would fill up and could spray. He was, say he had a 100-gallon tank and he was putting on 10 gallons on an acre, he could spray 10 acres before he went and filled up. So it made a huge difference in the efficiency. Had some side effects that we'll talk about sometime, but that's what we're talking about with an ultra low volume. Very fine particles, drops is suspended in the air because you've got a high velocity fan that's carrying the material. Advantages were easy to handle, no agitation, non-abrasive, no nozzles, very little residue left on surfaces. Disadvantages was high drift hazard. You can imagine
They're floating everywhere.
it will float, and wind is a real detriment to that. It required specialized equipment, and because of the concentration of the material that you were using, there was a high risk of the dermal and inhalation exposure to the applicator. And sometimes the concentrated material would cause your equipment parts to deteriorate. All right, we've got ready-to-use aerosols. That's like a Lysol was an example that they use. Your insect sprays, your Hot Shot and Raid and things of that type are examples of a ready-to-use aerosol. They're fine airborne particles or droplets plus a propellant.
Usually CO2 or nitrogen.
Of some sort. Hard to tell. And they rarely tell you what that propellant is. I don't know that I've ever seen it on one. Advantages: they're convenient, portable, easily stored, retain potency for an extended period of time, and can be used directly at the target. We're talking about insect sprays. You see a nest at the corner of your porch, and you get a can of Raid or Hot Shot, and you shoot him just like shooting a shotgun. So it says it's limited use, inhalation risk, hazardous if punctured, and may be difficult to confine to a target area or site. There's another hazard that's associated with this, and I hope you all haven't had any experience with this. If you have, you're lucky to still be here. Any of you had an aerosol can that happened to be put in in a garbage barrel or anything that was on fire?
That thing's gonna explode.
Really? Really, Tyler? You think it'll explode?
It might just explode and the bottom might come shooting out after you.
That's why I said I'm glad you haven't had exposure because you're still here. Those are dangerous. Yeah.
Any pressurized contents under heat.
Yeah. Well, you spray it all out and you think it's all gone.
Pepsi can or something.
What was that?
I was just saying somebody shook up a Diet Pepsi can and tossed it in fire one time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's effective, but they're a hazard, potential hazard if they get in. They let you know they're there. Fog or smoke generators are fine particles or droplets suspended in the air and distributed by smoke or fog machines. These are used also for mosquito control and in a house. If you ever use a humidifier, it's doing the same thing. That's a fog generator to increase the humidity in your home. Not too great a need for them right now, but when we get to December, January, and February, most of our heating systems will reduce the humidity enough in our homes that quite often you'll see somebody using a humidifier to put more moisture in the air. Advantages of smoke and fog generators: easy to fill an entire indoor space with pesticide or treat a large area outdoors. Disadvantage: highly specialized use sites and equipment, difficult to confine to a target pest or to clean up if spilled, and a high risk of inhalation. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying the wood stove I have outside will repel mosquitoes a lot better than what we did beforehand, before we had one.
Yeah, that would be one of the things. I have seen these used in grain storage facilities too. If it's a confined area, they will put off a smoke or fog generator in one of those. And I have used a smoke generator in a greenhouse. If I had a major insect problem that I couldn't control in any other way, there are some smoke generators that you can close up all the vents and restrict use, keep anybody out of it, and put an insecticide in a smoke bomb type thing in a greenhouse. It's effective for those types of applications. All right, one of the other definitions we'll talk about is what's called an invert emulsion. That contains a water-soluble active ingredient dispersed in oil, creating a thick mixture. Can anybody give me an example of a household invert emulsion?
Take the two on the screen.
I'll be willing to bet that every one of you consumed this weekend.
Water.
An invert emulsion. Some people don't like it, but I would bet that most of you consumed this one way or another this weekend. Rachel, what do you think I'm talking about? Did you have any mayonnaise on your cheeseburger?
No.
Okay. Well, what I'm saying, most of us have had some contact with mayonnaise this weekend. Either on a sandwich or as a dressing in your slaw or something. But mayonnaise is an invert emulsion. It's a water-soluble active ingredient dispersed in oil to create a thick mixture. And that's just an example of an invert emulsion. Not complicated. There are not many invert emulsions that are used in the pesticide industry. There was one there they called comine. I don't know what it is. But the advantages of invert emulsions, from the pesticide aspect of it. Low drift, increased rate of penetration and reduced runoff. Disadvantages: difficult to treat the undersides of foliage, limited availability, and difficult to clean up. Like I say, I don't know of an invert emulsion that, at least I don't have any experience with a particular product of that type. I'm sure there's some that are there. And for a chemical company to dispense a product in an invert emulsion, it's got to have a unique need and not have any other mechanism for delivery. That's kind of a unique one. So.
I just looked up that comine. It's for aquatic weeds such as hydrilla and some others.
Okay.
I don't know what they are.
Okay.
Usually for water bodies on golf courses, parks, and otherwise.
Yeah. Well, when we get into aquatics, they require a different set of criteria. There are not many materials that are recommended for aquatic use, and what you're talking about is dealing with aquatic weeds, which makes it even more particular.
Yeah.
Because go ahead, Tom.
Which it says here, water treated with comine can be used immediately after treatment for drinking, watering livestock, fishing, swimming, and recreation.
Well, that's why I said it was specific.
Oh yeah.
Because most things that you put in water are going to have some potential hazard because you're putting it in water and it's easily translocated and moved. So that one is, with that particular invert emulsion, I imagine it's just like throwing a blob of mayonnaise in a pond. You're going to put in the amount that's needed for the area that you're dealing with, but then it doesn't move. It doesn't go anywhere. So that's what you're talking about with that. Talks about the next one that's listed here talks about flowables, and the abbreviation is AF or AF, and they're fine solid particles that are suspended in a liquid. And it gives a pesticide example again that I'm not familiar with, but one that you guys will be familiar with, and I hope you haven't enjoyed it. I never did, but I have taken some Pepto-Bismol at some time, and that's
Stuff tastes like chalk powder.
a flowable. It's got a fine solid particle suspended in a liquid. I hope you don't get in a physical condition where you need Pepto-Bismol. That's not a but the advantages: it's easy to handle and apply, low exposure risk, seldom clogs your nozzles, generally not phytotoxic. Disadvantages are it may settle, requires shaking, difficult to remove from the container, will need agitation, may be abrasive, difficult to clean up, and leaves a visible residue.
And it's Pepto-Bismol in every description.
Yeah, well, that's why they're using that as an example. Pepto-Bismol is nasty stuff in my eyes. I don't.
It is disgusting.
Yeah, I just don't like it. But I don't want to be in a condition where I need it to. Next one's called liquid baits. They are liquids that attract or feed, feeding stimulant plus food and a pesticide. An example would be a pesticide would be a liquid ant bait, and a household example would be a hummingbird nectar. It wouldn't be a pesticide, but it's an attractant to bring the hummingbirds to your house so you can see it. How many of you use hummingbird feeders?
Used to.
You do?
Used to.
Used to?
Then the ants and the squirrels took over.
The what?
The ants and the squirrels took it over.
I understand ants. I'm surprised squirrels did it. That's just an example. It's an attractant. That's a liquid bait. We don't have many liquid baits. We've got several others, but we don't have many liquid ones. Says they're effective to control certain species of ants and cockroaches. Ready-to-use bait stations are quite apt. Disadvantages: not all ants and cockroaches will feed on this type bait. Must be replaced frequently. Next one is a gel type bait. That's a gel attractant with a feeding stimulant plus the food and the pesticide. There again, it's a household, different type of insect baits. A household example, and I never thought about this as being a household example of a gel type bait.
Peanut butter?
No, toothpaste. Cake decorating pastries or gels. Or gels.
I want toothpaste. But,
It's a gel.
what would that be used to attract? Ants?
It's just an household example, that's all. It's not really attracting anything. Effective control certain species of critters, tamper-resistant package. Disadvantages, not all of them will feed on that bait, and it must be replaced quickly. Solid baits. Now, you've all used solid baits of some sort, I'm sure.
Poison rat pellets?
Yeah, poison, mouse bait, and things of that type. The household example that they use is, I'm a little surprised at. I hadn't looked at this specifically, but a granola bar is what they call a household example of a solid. It's pre-manufactured, granola bar. So, disadvantages can attract non-target animals, and dead pests may create an odor. So if you've used mouse bait and rat bait, you know what we're talking about. A dust. It's an active ingredient bound to a finely ground inert solid. Its examples are talc, chalk, or clay. A pesticide example is Sevin dust. That's a formulation of Sevin that's bound on a finely ground clay or talc. Then a household example would be baby powder. Back in the it was before I was even aware of it. A majority of the application of pesticides to commercial apple and peach orchards were done by using dust machines. They would actually use elemental ground sulfur and put it in a big type blower of a thing and drive through the peach orchard or the apple orchard and just blow the sulfur out through the thing. And it was one of the problems with that was it was prone to drift, and it didn't adhere to the target, and it's going to irritate your eyes and ears and nose blowing that dust around there. It was a nasty chore.
How long would you think that just blowing dust on something would cause it to stick?
Well, they would do it early in the morning when there was a little bit of dew or moisture there.
So it'd stick with the dew.
Stick with the dew. Mm-hmm. When it got hot in the middle of the day, they didn't do much. When it began to cool off again late in the evening, they would do it again. You had to use what materials you had and what equipment that you had available. But I remember seeing the old dust machines when I worked in Winchester, but I've never seen one of those used. They are not used anymore, those type things. Now, there are dusts that are used on gardens and so forth. And some of the equipment, there are some little blowers, little dust type blowers that you can get to blow something like Sevin dust across your beans. And there are some really sophisticated pieces of equipment to use to apply that, something like pantyhose. You ever seen that done? You put the dust in that little piece of pantyhose, and you can just shake it across your beans or your tomatoes or whatever, and it'll dispense a volume of that finely powdered material on those surfaces. All right, we're about to a good spot to stop. We'll pick up here on Wednesday. We'll talk about granules, but we'll go through this. We're about halfway through it, and that way we will figure out where we are. If you got any questions, but this isn't rocket science. It's trying to create an awareness with you of what we're doing. So,
I know a question. Can fish be considered pests?
yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on what type of fish and where they are. That's just like a weed. It's something out of place.
I said it doesn't belong there?
Yeah. Your pond can get out of balance, and your bluegill can be a pest because there's too many of them there. There's a fish in some of the tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay up in the northeastern part of the state called a snakehead, which gets to be extremely large, but it eats most every other fish that's there. In that situation, that's a pest. So that's just an example. Okay, you all right with that discussion? You didn't finish your tea, Carol.
Yeah, she's slack.